Michael Irons and the Great Continent by Nathan Moore. Chapter 1. Strange World, Familiar Circumstance. Accustomed to dark clothes and concealed arms, Michael Irons languished in exposed discomfort within a pig-iron cage suspended alongside a dirt road, naked but for sackcloth trousers 2 sizes too small. Even he understood these rusted confines to be ill-made, riddled with warping and discoloration. Indeed, sheer force could easily break his prison, but once free, the simple spears of his guards were more than capable of curtailing further effort. And despite his size being greater than any person he had seen during his 2-day imprisonment, he was not in ideal fighting condition. While Irons had maintained strength by working as a ship hand while crossing the ocean, the long storm at Journey's End had sapped much of his vitality with perpetual sickness, and when the ship was broken by the sea, the ensuing struggle to shore left him exhausted and depleted. Found near senseless on the beach, the locals had swiftly apprehended and imprisoned him. In the 2 days since, Irons saw no food and a meager ration of water. Half delirious with naught to do but consider and observe, his mind did eventually vaguely recall tales told by Dutch traders about an isolated island nation in the east, and rumors of the Spanish politics obscured therein. In attempts at more productive endeavors, Michael Irons found his efforts at observation largely frustrated. His cage, its base suspended at eye level on the side of the dirt road between the village and the fields, allowed him to witness the comings and goings of all, and for them to likewise gawk at his freakish differences. But, despite being a prominent fixture, his attempts to parse words, even general mannerisms, apart from a few more animated gestures, left him bewildered. During years of war on the European continent, Irons had become familiar with the immediacy of concepts and the means by which they were communicated, regardless of language. But the language and movements here were too alien for him to parse much beyond how and when they bowed. This lack of understanding was only exacerbated by his increasing weakness due to the lack of food and sufficient hydration. So much so that on the 3rd night, the moon had well begun its rise before Irons realized the guards seemed to have abandoned their watch, and a great shadow now loomed overhead. "You stink of myriad dark things." Irons raised malnourished and parched eyes towards the direction of the words, which drifted direct down towards him from a dark shape, looming high. The mouth he saw was far too large, far too wide, and forcefully locked into a malevolent grin by twin pincer fangs, over which bulged 2 insectoid eyes, large and black, yet still they twinkled with a deep evil and a very human malevolence. All this was held high atop a massive, segmented body like that of a centipede. The nightmarish form was reared high, yet still trailed far behind and off the road, concealed by the tall grasses and nighttime darkness. Irons blinked slowly, then coughed once and attempted to wet his palate to reply. Intrigue and distaste colored the creature's distended features, its attitude a little soured by the lack of fearful response. Finally, Irons managed, "You are no demon. How is it you speak my tongue?" "Ah, incorrect. I am become Oni. You from the realm of Lucifer would in fact name me demon." The cold blue eyes of Michael Irons narrowed. "I have banished many demons. You are not one." 4 3-fingered hands opened in a manner of acceptance. "I fell not from heaven, true, and I was born of men. Name me beast or creature or perversion. I am nothing more than what I wished to become." "And what is that?" "Predator." And the centipede's mouth all but dripped with loathsome venoms. "Victim no more, eater of those who gnawed at my works and life." "Why do you associate me with the realm of hell?" A gasping, rasping laugh hissed from the broad features. "Hell, no. Your continent writhes under the watch of Lucifer. Lucifer there, Satan across the sea, and here the once human thing grinned with twisted glee. The Lord of Flies, the unholy spirit of the triumvirate damned and perverted. Irons scowled and sat back in his cage once more as if in a sulk. And why are you here? The desire of evil to converse never fails to perplex. The leering smile, distended and warped as it was, became almost soft and puckish as the black eyes twinkled. You are going nowhere. Venom dripped from the thing's mandibles. See? No guards about this night. They have left you for me. No need to rush. Once I starved, now I always savor. Michael Irons sneered in scarcely concealed disgust. If you were once human, why become so hideous? The creature bristled. Its segmented legs worked in agitation. Hideous, spat the centipede, incensed. You starve in your cage, fleshling, while I feast, powerful and protected. The grinning face thrust itself toward Irons. Stoke my wrath at your peril, weakling, and your death will linger. Despite his sapped strength, Irons lashed out with both arms, hands snaking through the bars, fingers extended and rigid, knife-like, gouging into the great black eyes. Blinded and in agony, the centipede recoiled, escaping it from the intended killing blow. It tore itself from the grip of Irons, flailing and writhing, maddened in pain and rage. These throws dealt a great blow to the cage, and Irons was flung, still contained, to the dirt road, then rolling into the grass, the inferior construction creaking and groaning, threatening to break at every point. While battered, Irons summoned what reserve he could, and with two swift, vicious kicks, the door burst away to clatter back onto the packed dirt of the road. Regaining enough despite the damage, the centipede, hearing the noise, closed the distance in a blur that even Irons could not follow, constricting about and crushing the iron-barred door. Irons had fled the moment he had been able, then, seeing the blinded demon's reaction to sound, he froze. The centipede dropped the pieces of what had once been a door and ceased its outburst, its mandibles dribbling with enraged venom. While still incensed, it nevertheless began a more intentional search, even while too infuriated for words, its head shaking and thrusting about at intervals, as if madness clawed still at its scarcely cognizant considerations. The farmland's valley was absent woods, and this central location between the town and the rice paddies was heavily used during the day. There was no place to hide, nor even rocks to use as distraction or weapons, and the grassland around him seemed dry for want of rain, their parched leaves sure to announce any movement made therein. The centipede found the broken post from which the cage had hung, then began to circle about it in ever-widening loops, its long body trailing behind and keeping track of its progress, the segmented legs propelling it with furious but focused purpose. Then Irons felt his stomach drop. 5 torchlights bobbed in the distance, coming up the road from the village, likely drawn by the commotion, though if they knew the centipede existed, as the creature had implied, Irons could not conceive of what would possess anyone to investigate. Regardless, in short order there were soon seen 5 figures hurrying up the road, and soon enough their raised voices could be heard. The centipede also took notice. While not its original prey, the enraged creature made an anticipatory hiss and took to the grass on the side of the road opposite Irons, clearly intent upon the villager's flank. Searching about in the half-moon's meager light, Irons caught the gleam of metal and retrieved it. A bar from the cage, almost as long as his arm. Its shorn point was dull and its rigidity doubtful, but it would need to suffice. Armed as he was able, Irons fled down the road towards the villagers, waving his arms and crying a warning, mimicking some gestures and sounds he had observed during his imprisonment, hoping also that his frantic tone and animated gestures would communicate urgency. He could see the villagers more clearly and saw that they were at least armed guards, each carrying a spear. They pointed and spoke furiously, seeming confused. But as one of the guards turned to another, he happened to catch sight of a low shadow beginning to rise from the grass. He screamed, falling backward to the ground, fumbling with his spear. The dark form swept through the group in an armored rush, scattering them while seizing the despairing man, to disappear with startling swiftness into the grass on the other side of the road. A final shrill scream was cut sickeningly short, and the sound of wet feasting began. Irons drew near to the guards, all of whom had well forgotten him for the moment. They were, to his eye, equivalent of local levy infantry, in that they wore almost no armor, bore poor weapons, and seemed absent any training. They were frozen where they had fallen, terrified. Irons did not blame them, but this would need to change if the remaining four hoped to survive. He moved towards them at speed, letting the unsettling sounds of consumption from the tall grass cover his approach. When Irons emerged from the darkness into the guard's torchlight, he saw they remained stunned to the point of shock, eyes wide, minds refusing further consideration. Regardless, Irons put up his hands to show no ill intent, and mimicked what he presumed to be a greeting as well as he could, and bowed repeatedly in an approximation of observed local custom. His bow was returned, numbly, but no more could be done. The eating noises had stopped. "Ah, foreigner," the voice whispered from the grass as if right beside his ear, and strangely, as they heard it, the guards seemed to react as if they too understood what was said. "I can see you once more, pale flesh. If those others value their lives, they should flee. Aiding you is unwise." The guards trembled, petrified. "This town has languished under my mercy, but perhaps tonight I ought to consider the well-being of their wives and children." The guards dropped their weapons as one man and fled. A deep, heavy, rumbling chuckle of satisfaction emerged from the grass behind Irons, who ducked as he whirled away, grabbing a discarded spear as he did so, planting the butt of the weapon against the dirt road. "Now we may dance." Movement in the corner of his eye drew Irons' gaze to the right, just in time for him to see the tail-end pincer of the centipede vanish into the grass behind him. Irons did his best to not show he had noticed, and it seemed the gambit worked. With the patience of a hunter in lean times, the centipede crept close behind Irons. Even with the dry grass and the creature's size, the movement was almost imperceptible. However, knowing that was the direction was all Irons needed. He prepared. When the beast came within his range, Irons waited a calculated beat. Then, in a single motion, he turned and flung himself in a great leap, spear gripped in both hands and ready. Moments such as these, an unwise gambit made, never failed to make even the cold heart of Irons sing with fearsome heat. For all the creature's advantage, Irons had, as intended, caught the centipede in mid-coil, metaphorically flat-footed. In the dim moonlight, he could see the thing's regrown eyes glitter, granting him an obvious target. And Irons obliged. Down plunged the spear, thrust with all the vicious hatred his starved and travel-worn frame could rally. The creature's eye was ruptured once more, but instead of being allowed to recoil, the spear's dull point hit the back of its carapace skull before any action could foment. Irons flung himself backward and to the side, expecting the kind of writhing produced by a severed insect or worm, but instead, the ghastly frame seized in one great contraction, then collapsed. Mortal flesh warped by hellish union, but flesh nonetheless. With a degree of effort, Irons removed the centipede's head. When dawn was breaking, dull and chill, shrouded by low mist, he arrived at the edge of the village and saw ahead a gathering, likely a fearful meeting about the local demon's potential retribution. Irons approached. Sharp and scared calls were made, spears leveled, but Irons did not check his slow, long stride, certain that the great severed head of the centipede he bore would earn amnesty. There seemed to be a leader of the guard and several village elders, but no individual he could readily identify as the headman. He stood, tired from his efforts and of his ragged state, then, with a sigh, dropped the head in front of the silent crowd. Irons waited where he stood, as there was a protracted discussion regarding him, during which a meager but appreciated meal of rice and fish was surreptitiously presented to him. He ate this, grateful, and tried to parse certain words or expressions to convey his gratitude, though who knows how successful these haphazard and awkward efforts were. At least a few butchered pronunciations managed to elicit a smile or two from the wide-eyed children who peered at him from a distance. The decision of what was to be done with him arrived thankfully in time for him to catch the turning tide. Thus, when the sun was well up, Irons, rearmed and cloaked in his customary black, was on a black market ship bound for the mainland.